Good evening, everyone. This is Lady Rage on Geek Radio. Tonight we have a very special guest with us, Joe Granato.
Hello, hello.
Joe is the founder of the new 8-Bits Hero. We also have a guest host with us, Devon. Go ahead and introduce yourself, hon.
My name is Devin Scott, a.k.a. my protege. Nice to meet you. I'm glad to be here with you.
You want to go ahead and start off with the questions?
Yes. So, Joe, how are you doing today?
I'm doing excellent. It has been a crazy day. It has been a crazy month.
I can believe it. So I'm checking out your Kickstarter. That's exciting. Just see all that support. How does that feel?
It's great, man. This is the third Kickstarter I've launched, and umpteenth one I've been directly involved with, and the support for this one has been awesome. And why I say I've been part of Kickstarters that have succeeded and some that have failed, and I've been part of a lot of Kickstarters before. The one thing about this Kickstarter in particular that I find truly amazing is I have not seen a single trolling comment anywhere.
Wow.
I am mesmerized and stupefied. I can't believe it. We were all ready for the backlash, and it never really came. So that's nice. That's different for me.
Are we on the same internet now?
Yeah, that's exactly. And I'll tell you, mostly I can point to the actual NES dev community and the Nintendo Age communities. Like, those guys are amazing. I thought for sure that when I started to think about this project about 6 months ago, I wanted to reach out to those guys and because they would inevitably have to help see this thing come to fruition. And I reached out, and I thought for sure they were going to be like any other like crazy nerdy community on the web and be super protective of what it is that they love and be really sort of standoffish to strangers and outsiders. And it was completely the opposite. Like, they were the most welcoming community. They were most supportive. They were like gung-ho, anything I needed, and very cool. And that's kind of how the project started. So that was a really good way to start,
That's pretty good. I see that. The very first time you came up with this project idea, you were only, was it 7 years old when you actually started?
Yeah, technically, I came up with an idea for when I was 7 years old. It was 1987. It was like the heyday for the Nintendo Entertainment System. That back then it was just the Nintendo. It was the only one, so it was just Nintendo. And I basically my entire young life revolved around playing Nintendo games, and like the first games in what are now still huge franchises: Super Mario Brothers, Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Kid Icarus,
nice.
Mega Man, Final Fantasy, Dragon Warrior, like all these games. And it really sort of compelled my creativity. It wasn't just a passive sort of consumer type scenario. It made me want to create my own things, and so I ended up writing my own game and designing levels with graph paper and designing a whole world and a story and everything like that. And in 1987, as a 7-year-old, I sent some of the designs to Nintendo of America and said, "Hey, please send me all the stuff I need to make my video game." And I think that's about all the letter said. And I was just sure all summer. I waited all summer, waiting for those delivery trucks to roll up with my space-aged computers. Just kind of, I would just obviously I'd know how to use them. I would just know. And of course, I got this little form letter telling me to do good in math and thank you for supporting Nintendo and whatever. And all those designs just kind of ended up in a box and threw in my parents' shed and just kind of lay dormant for almost 30 years.
Oh, yeah. So not quite the same reception you got from the modern NES
right.
community.
Well, and somebody told me that I should reach out to Nintendo and see if I can get a indie license to port this to Wii U. And I got really excited for a minute. I said, wait a minute. I feel just as excited as I did in 1987. Do I really want to go through that heartache again?
Oh, yes. But no, that would be a great idea, and I think that we live in a different world now.
Yeah.
And I remember I think I got my Nintendo around the same time, and I got a few games that just made me wish to do the same kind of thing. And I would never have imagined it. So I actually applaud your bravery.
Well. And it's funny because I talked about this with somebody else that I podcasted with recently, back in those days, you could fit everyone who was involved in the game development community who was actually developing games for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Probably could fit them inside of a large movie theater. Like that's it. They were the only ones who knew how to do it. That's all. And those are the only people that were invited to the party, you know. And now it's a whole different world, you know. Like everyone can build a game. Everyone could see their game sort of ideas realized and stuff. Middle school kid or elementary school kid could learn the basics of Game Maker and make a small game and stuff. I mean, it's crazy. You know, it's a totally different world.
Exactly. When you were kind of building up support for this phase of the project, you mentioned reaching out to a lot of really great, really interesting people. Who among that kind of sticks out as a wow? I don't believe I'm getting support from, blank.
Well, fortunately, I've been sort of in this game for a while, and I've known a lot of the major players major players in indie gaming, which sounds kind of ridiculous when you say it like that, but it was only 1 degree of separation between me and the guys from Yacht Club Games who did Shovel Knight. It was only 1 degree of separation to Brian from V Blank Games who did Retro City Rampage. Yeah. Only 1 degree of separation between me. So it was nice. I kind of had like there was a connectivity between me and a lot of people already, and they all were really receptive. But one of the things I thought was really bizarro and crazy was that I reached out to Mark Erickson, who is an artist and illustrator out on the West Coast, and he actually designed box covers and posters and promotional items for real 8-bit Nintendo games in the 80s.
Wow. And
he mocked up a label for us for the cartridge. And it was really bizarre and kind of surreal, Twilight Zone-y to like, okay, this is an idea I had when I was 7.
Yeah.
I was probably trying to reach out to the same type of people, like him would have been one of the people I would have reached out to back in the day, and now 30 years later, he actually got on board. He's like, this is an awesome idea. I'm really excited by this, and actually sketched something. So that's kind of like that. It's not like the most amazing thing in the world, but it's really novel to think about it like that. Like that's sort of and this is a dream come true kind of kind of thing.
It's kind of like an emotional time capsule, I imagine, that people always say, I wonder what 5-year-old me would say to me right now, and I'm pretty sure 5-year-old you would look at you and say, you're pretty awesome.
Yeah. I wish I could go back and give him what's funny is not long after that, I'd actually learned a little degree of programming and used to program stuff in a old Mac program called HyperCard. And
HyperCard player.
If you remember that, I used to make point-and-click adventure games using HyperCard. That's not what it was for, but I repurposed it for that. And why that's interesting? I think if I was able to go back and teach myself assembly language at 7 and gave myself the tools, I probably could have built a simple Nintendo game at 7 years old. It's too bad. So next on my list, after I make the Nintendo game, I'm going to build a time machine. That's next. That's for my next trick.
You have your flux capacitor in order. You're going to make a Kickstarter for that too.
I actually saw a flux capacitor that plugs into a cigarette lighter. I thought that was awesome.
Oh, please send a link in the comments. So yeah, that's there's a lot of technology different. I think what's beautiful about this is you have this idea that started off, and let's be honest, it was as big an idea as a 7-year-old could make, but it was inspired by all these really big things, and so it had a place already, but it was kind of limited to the 8-bit world that you wanted to create for it. And now you're kind of working backwards, trying to build a modern machine with ancient tools. What are you using? What's the big disparity between how you're doing it now versus how your team would have done it if they were doing it back in 1987?
That's a good question. Back in 1987, there were particular, developers kits, and they,
the ones you have.
the ones that would be illegal for me to have and actually produce commercial games of now. But there are other tools now available. But no, I mean they had in-house developers kits where basically, I mean, all Nintendo programming was done in ASM, like assembly language ASM, and I can't even imagine some of the tools they used. A lot of it, I think, was literally, they didn't have computing with such great, graphic user interfaces and things like that in 1985. So I'd imagine they were like literally doing stuff on graph paper with numbers and then typing in those numbers laboriously one at a time in hex editors and things like that. I can't even conceive of that. Now, what I could do is I could build a tool, and for my prototype, I built a tool to handle like name table and collision table generation, which is the backgrounds, what you actually see on the screen, and where the collisions will be detected. And I made a tool. I actually made a tool just for kicks. I made a tool with GameMaker that would show me what would be on the screen and export the data, the binary data, that then assembly language would be able to read and convert into an NES game. And that's what I have that's playable on my official NES right now, which was just stupid bizarre. I just wanted to see if I could do that. I'll probably program my tools in C, or my hardware guy will build some of the tools. But I just want to see, could I use a modern gaming tool to make assets for an NES game? And sure enough, I did, and it was really weird and, again, very surreal. It didn't seem like that's how it should work, but it was cool.
It sounds like what a modern skyscraper engineer would say if he could go back in time and watch the Egyptians build the pyramids.
Right. Like, man, you guys want a bulldozer?
Yeah. Oh, but that's really great. Now, obviously, this is a big project. There are 9 core people on your team.
And there's a lot more that are contributing.
Just a huge community of people helping you, contributors, and this core group. I think it's amazing to see all that, because I would never be able to think to myself. I never played when I was playing Legend of Zelda. I popped that little code cartridge into my Nintendo and I got excited. I never thought about at the time the number of people who were involved. I saw those credits at the end of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that your team is kind of built the same way as these other games?
That was the intent, to keep the team relatively small when you think in terms of video games, because now you have teams of thousands of people working on a game. So this would be more on the scale of what an NES game. I think we even have more people involved in this project than were involved in the core game building of an NES game. I think you had teams like 4 or 5 people for early NES games especially, and that's it. And but we decided that because of the way that the documentary is going to work, let's have one person sort of handling each aspect of the development of this game. So somebody developing the hardware, somebody is a programmer, somebody is the graphic artist and concept artist, somebody is the pixel artist, somebody as the composer, somebody, so everybody sort of has their job, and we'll be able to follow them through the documentary, seeing how they're retrofitting their modern skills to try and create something that fits in that little tiny 8-bit box,
That's a big deal. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about this, the documentary, the game, and everything else. This game is called Mystic Searches, correct?
Mystic Searches, yes. It's hilarious how many people now know that name. My best friend growing up and me have a good laugh about it every day. Every day I send him an email. I said, okay, we're going to go into 7-bit mode, or 7-year-old mode, and I say, look how ridiculous this is, and send him the next thing. Because he's probably the only person on the face of the earth that really gets the reference. Like, he's seen it go from when we were 7, playing Legend of Zelda and, screwing around, and like every year he heard it evolve into now it's like, okay, I'm turning 7 years old and I'm actually making that game I made at 7 again. And so, he gets the reference, and it's just funny to hear it come out of other people's mouths, because prior to doing this project, it was almost like that thing you're embarrassed about that you did when you were a kid. Like, oh yeah, I did that thing. It was so stupid. But now people are like, oh, I can't wait to play Mystic Searches, and it's just really weird to hear people say it.
Yes, that's a big deal. I imagine. I know I've burned books from when I was around that old, things I thought were clever then, and I put them away, and just to have that feeling that people, because I tell you what, I'm waiting for this right now. I'm talking to you, and it's kind of like when you're talking to your waiter, and you're salivating over this meal, and you're like, when is it going to get to the table? So I'm very excited about this, and you can tell that to 7-year-old you. So what was you mentioned Legend of Zelda a lot. I mean, obviously that's a big player. Like in the modern gaming community, if you're Hyrule Warriors, in the old school gaming community, it's kind of like a messianic figure in gaming, Link and Zelda. So is that kind of just an effect of the gaming community, or is this really the biggest influence you'd say you had when you were designing this game?
Well, hands down, I spent so many hours saving Hyrule. I was the kid who bombed every block, and I wouldn't create the maps because I wanted to do it, all with what was in game, and I didn't want any help, and I burned every bush and explored every alcove, and I actually thought my game was broken because I entered the name Zelda when I first started playing the game, and of course that takes you to the second quest, which didn't match any of the maps. So I yelled to my dad to take me back to the store and get me one that wasn't broken. But I still have memories of. I remember going to Toys R Us and buying that game. I can distinctly remember that, and the gold and the oh my god, this is like nothing I've ever experienced. And I still remember my dad calling me out, and when I would do bad on a test in school, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
I do bad in a history exam. My dad's defense was always, you can remember all the ways through all the labyrinths in The Legend of Zelda, but you can't remember who did this in your history class. And that was always his thing. Never really realizing that, and now we talk about it, he's like, yeah, I always thought they were just a waste of time, but look at what you're doing now. I'm like, see,
Yeah.
I tried to tell you, But yeah, I mean, Zelda was such a huge, impactful thing, and I think about why, and I think a lot of people our age had the same sort of experience. So before video games, you would get into fantasy by reading books and watching movies and things like that, right? But what's the youngest you could have been and read Tolkien? I mean, 10, 11 would be maybe. I mean, you'd have to be a really nerdy kid at 10 to be trying to read through Lord of the Rings. But with games, you're 5, 6, 7 years old. You are playing through a fantasy. You're being engaged in this fantasy world, in an even more compelling way than you would be reading Tolkien. You are the hero. These are accomplishments belong to you, the player, and I really connected to that. And so I'd say that that is probably the biggest influence of the game. And if I go back to those what's left of those early design documents, it was now we can put terms to it, a nonlinear, which is a term that didn't really exist in gaming back then, but it was a nonlinear, top-down sort of adventure game, and it was totally derivative of The Legend of Zelda. Absolutely, there's no hiding it. So, that's another reason why I brought more creatives into the project, because I need to put some padding between what my 7-year-old self thought this game should be, and then let's make our own universe with this, And Stephen King said something when he was creating his Dark Tower series. He wanted to write the Dark Tower series when he was 13, 14 years old. And he's really glad that he didn't start it until he was older, because he had just finished reading Lord of the Rings and he wanted to create his Lord of the Rings universe. And, and if he had written it at 12, 13, it would have been Lord of the Rings. He would have just ripped it off. And it took more years and experience for him to be able to create his opus, which is the Dark Tower series. And I'd like to think of this sort of the same way. If I had written this back then, I would have been making Legend of Zelda. Would have been the same thing.
Essentially.
Yeah.
Tropics, too.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely, though.
If people want to know, what this game is going to play mostly like, yes, it's going to be somebody who's very sort of, outside of the loop and hasn't played a lot of NES games and knows what Zelda looks like is going to play this and be like, well, that's just Legend of Zelda. Oh, that's a... Well, it's kind of like saying Mega Man is Super Mario Brothers.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Not
really. Yeah, it scrolls from one side to the other, and the sprites are about the same size, but it's not really the same kind of game,
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, my wife just got me in on the Dark Tower series, so I imagine how different that would be if it were his Lord of the Rings.
Sure. How far are you in the Dark Tower series?
I'm actually right now in Lisi's story, so I have a bunch of books that she needs to pass my way, but she's far more ahead of me in that one. So, but I'm making time for it. Another author you mentioned, Piers Anthony. Wow, I love the Zank series. That's
yeah. So that was another. Okay.
Yeah,
hold on now, because this is interesting. This comes full circle. All right, so how this is connected, how Piers Anthony is connected to this universe, how in One Degree of Separation, Mystic Searches relates to the Xanth series.
Yes.
I okay, so I'm 7 years old. I make these design documents for a game called Mystic Searches. I'm going to do this fast. I'm 9, 10 years old, and I discover HyperCard, and I make a point-and-click adventure game loosely based on some of the ideas, narrative ideas I had for Mystic Searches. I'm 10, 11 years old, and I get an assignment to write a short fantasy story, and I end up writing a 30-page, what then was considered an epic novel, 10 years old, you write a 30-page story, that was basically a story somewhat in the realm of Mystic Searches. And at 14 or 15, I'd rewrite it every couple of years, and I'd add more to it. And then I really found out, the purpose of writing as a creative medium, and I started to explore what the metaphors meant to me in my own novel universe. And it morphed and it changed and dramatically shifted into something else. And I was 19 and in college and taking, fiction writing courses, and I building out this whole fantastic universe again. And it kind of had these little tiny seeds from way back when. It was totally different now, but. And then, kept going. I was touring with a rock band. I was writing while we were on tour in my early 20s. Wrote a whole a novella that was this sort of the new evolution of this world. And then last year, I actually finished a novel called Beyond the Veil, which, if you're smart enough and you really know the source material, you could trace back and find an ancestry all the way back to Mystic Searches at 7 years old. So the same project. And so it's nowhere someone who doesn't know what they're looking for, they wouldn't see the same thing at all. But if someone's really looking, they can see that there's some crossover. Well, last year the first person I have a mutual writing partner who knows Piers Anthony, and one of my big influences was the Incarnations of Immortality series.
Yeah.
On a Pale Horse, Mars the Bringer of War, I'm sorry, Wielding Red Sword, all those. And so I just reached out to him. I said, hey, man, I'm a huge fan. You're a big inspiration to me. I don't know if you'd feel like giving this a read. I know you're probably slammed. I wouldn't want to take away from your creative time, but, we have this friend in common. You're actually pretty close to where I live now. Let me know if you'd be interested in checking it out. It would mean the world to me if you checked it out. And he responded like within an hour. And it was like, I don't usually do this, but I like the first couple pages that you sent me. Go ahead and send me the full manuscript. And he read and gave me a critique. He was the first reader of that story. So the first reader of my first novel was Piers Anthony.
That's pretty awesome. Just Mundania making it in the world, huh?
yeah, right. Well, and what both excites me and depresses me at the same time, I was hoping for a really glowing review, which I didn't get, but I didn't get a horrible review. His review was that it was thick and that it was it was almost too cerebral of a fantasy story, which I guess I'm okay with, but I'm a little bit scared about, because if Piers Anthony, who's writing about the man who lived his life backwards and complexities of that, is saying that my story is too cerebral, maybe I got to pull it back a little bit. I don't know.
Good point. But once again, let's get back to Legends of Zelda for a second.
Yeah.
And the story itself, it's thin. The hero saves the princess in 1981 to 1989 was filled with it, but the game is dense. And I tried playing through that again. I remember the very first time I picked it up, and I put it in, and I looked at it with the mind of an adult. I'm like, this is huge.
Yeah.
And it didn't deter me then, and it doesn't deter me now. So I don't think that's going to be a huge problem. But
Right.
that's exciting though. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And this game though, I think what's really interesting to me, you have kind of this Dreamcast VMU thing going on where you can play the 8-bit game, and then you can unlock things in a larger game. That's beautiful.
That's the hope and the prayer anyway. But no, we've established that communication between the two will be possible. What we haven't done is we've kind of made a positive assessment of that right before we launched the Kickstarter, just with enough time for us to say yes, we can do it, but not enough time for us to actually figure out exactly the manner and how we're going to use that. So we know what we're going to do is we're going to make a game that actually plays on the NES, and that one that plays on a PC, and hopefully a Mac, and hopefully Linux, and hopefully everything everywhere. But we know PC. So we decided we're going to put that game on flash memory inside the actual hardware, which is going to be a pain because we're going to do that all by hand, I think. For now, what we thought would be maybe 100 carts is now like close to 300 carts that we're making just to fulfill Kickstarter. I'm not complaining. That's awesome. That was the point. But wow, we're not even halfway through the Kickstarter yet. Anyway, so yeah, we have been talking at length about what this quote-unquote modern game is going to look like. And at first, we were thinking it would be, you know, a 3D world, 3D models. We have a 3D modeler on our team, and in our Kickstarter video, you see a quick shot of a low poly version of our hero. But then, you know, we've been talking to the folks, just our backers, and they're like, yeah, we're much more interested in the NES game. Why don't you do like another pixel art game, but one that doesn't have the limitations of the NES? And we said, oh, really? You'd be more interested in that? Like, oh yeah, definitely. And so we started thinking about that. Then we started working with this idea of doing, because we have such amazing illustrators on the crew, doing a game that's based in like hand-drawn illustration animation, like cell animations.
Yes.
And we thought about that and what that would entail. So that got put. So that's where we are right now. We're kind of like, I don't know how that game's going to be, but the idea is that, you know, when you unlock a spell or a you know, some kind of item, some kind of achievement on the NES, it opens up that to be available on the modern game. Whether it's going to be mandatory or just a cool bonus, those are all the things that we're still sort of conceptualizing and talking about. But yeah, I think it's everybody who is a fan of retro gaming is sort of geeking out over that part of it. So
yes, I never even thought of stuff like that. You know, when I had my SNES, you know, I remember when things like Sega Channel came out, and I thought that was a huge thing. Like, oh, games are getting bigger, and that's just a great thing to do. And
thanks, man.
What kind of gave you the idea for that? Like,
well, the idea actually came. I can kind of point to something that gave me an idea. Back when I was about 21 years old or so, I was touring with a band called Eat Your Neighbors, and we were doing pretty well. We played with the Misfits, played with the Toadies. We had a decent level of success, and we were touring the country. And one of the ways I was making money, a little extra side cash, was I was doing some, you know, Flash web development for people from the tour van, and then we'd get to a hot spot. We'd get to like Kinko's or something, and I'd upload that, and client would pay via PayPal, and you know, whatever. Well, one client asked me if I could make them. This is like 2001. One client asked me if I could make them a game, and I was very hesitant because I didn't know and whatever. And they said, "How much would you charge for something like that?" And I honestly had no idea. I didn't know what to tell them. And they came back with a number. And I said, yep, that is exactly what I charge to do that, and I can do that for you, and I can have that. And then I distinctly remember the entire drive between Seattle and Salt Lake City. We had a show one night in Seattle and the next night in Salt Lake City. I taught myself Flash development, for Flash game development, and made them this really simple, stupid game for their website, and they loved it. They thought it was awesome. So anyway, that's when I got back into gaming, and I conceptualized then a game that we could use as a promotional tool for the band. And the idea was, you play the game, you beat a level, it unlocks a new song on an unrecorded or unreleased album, and then by the time the person has beaten all 12 stages or whatever, they'd have a whole new album by us. And I even said, wouldn't it be cool to actually make a Nintendo game that could do that, like a physical game that you'd play and you'd actually have, you know. And you'd actually have like a flash drive in it, and you'd get the music, it would open up on the flash drive. Wouldn't that be so cool? And of course, back then, no idea how to even approach doing that. And the NES was still under patent, so couldn't have done it even if I wanted to. But since then, the patent has expired and whatever. And I think that was my first idea, my first time I thought about sort of crossing a retro game with unlocking something for you. You want to play this game because you want to get this thing, you know, in real life that would be exciting to you. So in this, you beat a level, you gain an achievement. You don't only get the satisfaction, but you unlock more gameplay on the other deliverable, which would be exciting. Or maybe even video clips, or different songs from the soundtrack you can now download or whatever. That's kind of the idea. That's where it came from.
I really like that. That's a great way to kind of mix the old and the new.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you did Flash and development and everything. That's pretty cool because I remember around 2001. That was the era for like PopCap and and that was kind of the thing to do. So I think you probably had this divine inspiration thing going on for you because right then these events, like I'm listening to your story, it's inspiring because it plays out. I would literally support if you made a game of the story of making this game.
It's funny you say that because we thought about doing that for iOS.
Yes.
It would be a non-linear way to watch the movie. So you'd actually unlock parts of the documentary as you played through this game of the making of the movie and the game. It's like NES Inception. It's like NESception.
That's insanely meta, but that's pretty. So yeah, you're also going to be teaching them. That's what I think is great about this too. You're going to have tutorials on what you did.
We figure why not, because we're going to be doing this thing. It seems like a lot of people want to know how to do this thing, and while the resources out there are cool, most people are more interested in making their project than they are, helping others make their project, and that's okay. That's fine. I'm a teacher. I've been a teacher. I was a teacher for 6 years, and I taught game development. I enjoy teaching people. I have no problem taking because I don't know everything about this either. I'm still learning as I go too. Kind of a trial by fire for me. I have no problem taking what I'm learning and then passing it on to the next person who wants to learn. And I'm hoping what I want is more NES games. I would love for, I do this and I put out this set of tutorials on how we made our game. Now you go do something with it, and that person comes back a year later and has a game that makes mine look like a piece of crap. And I would be totally okay and excited about that. Their game gets 5 stars, mine gets 1.5 stars, and I'm totally fine with that. And I just want more to play. I would love to get some games that were inspired by this project.
No, and like I said, it's very inspiring. That's a great opportunity because what you're giving is you're giving people the exact same thing you asked Nintendo for. Hey, we have this idea for a game because your game inspired me. Give me the stuff I need to make it. And you're putting it right there with the cartridge, and that's beautiful.
I'm the Robin Hood of the NES, I guess.
I like that.
Not to be confused with Kevin Costner and the Robin Hood NES game. That's a totally different thing.
But that's really it. Because I've done application development for a long time, and if you were saying, hey, you work with computers, how do you make a game like this? I'd be like, nope, don't know. Where to begin? So the fact that you've dug up all of this work to get this far, it's wonderful. And I would love to. You said some of the stuff about you can get the cartridge to talk, and I'm like, how do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you do that? And
and that's another thing too. Is there's a lot of information out there. You can find all this stuff out there. There's nothing I'm going to be revealing that you couldn't find in other places. But nobody has really collected it the way that I'm hoping to. And there have been attempts to. It's not like there's on Nintendo Age forums. There's literally everything you could ever need to know about the hardware and the programming for the NES. You can find it right now. What it's really hard to do is navigate that in a how do I actually do something with this information sort of way. And so we're hoping to sort of do that. We're also teaming up with Jason Rappaport from Zelda Universe. He's the guy who runs Zelda Universe. And he's been very supportive of he's a really cool guy. And he's about to launch a company called SquareNot. And that's going to be a really cool company. And through SquareNot, we're going to release a bunch of tutorials for the NES as well.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So what was the biggest constraint? Because I know Nintendo. I've done chiptune music, so I already know those constraints. I know Nintendo sprites can only use 3 colors at a time from a 24-color palette. Lots of really hard things to take an idea this big and kind of put it there. What's the biggest constraint that you run into or anyone on your team has mentioned that you kind of said, I have this big thing and I need to cram it into this little tiny.
Well, there's two that come to mind, and we still don't know how to overcome them. One, we have a published fantasy novelist on our crew as the narrative developer. That's awesome. How do you translate that to something that's going to fit, like the beautiful, lush world that she's gonna by default create, because that's what we want?
Yes.
This whole mythology and this whole beautiful world and everything, and then cram it down into something that you can express in a handful of graphics, and that's it. Like, I don't even know if we're gonna have dialogue. If we're gonna have text, we might not. You know, we might make it like more like Journey, where it's all visual cues that give you the story. So that's one. The other big one for me that bothers me is the amount of actual physical memory that you have, and the reason that's a problem is if we use the memory mapper MMC1, which is probably what we're going to use, we only have 128 kilobits of CHR data, like the actual graphics data, right? So 128 kilobits disappears like nothing. That's like having 10 pages of level data, and that's it. So if you can imagine that, we have this lush world that we want to be able to create with bosses for every level, and these very different looking terrains and things like that. I'll work within the color palettes. That's fine. I can handle it. I like the chiptunes. The chiptunes is fine. But knowing that we have ideas for 12 different mini worlds inside this world and how they're gonna fit together, and then having to either reuse the same graphics for multiple ones or cut some of them out. That's the kind of thing that's killing me. Like, we have the ideas of how to make this game this long and this big and we have the capability to make all those graphics, but literally the hardware won't let us do that. So that's one of the constraints I'm battling.
That's a big deal. It makes me think about the very first time I played Final Fantasy VII. I got that, switch to disc 2.
Right.
You sit there thinking how those FMVs take up so much space and everything. So it's still a problem with gaming technology.
There was on the table a conversation that would work the same way, in that since we're going to flash memory, we have two different ROMs that write to the chips, and you could play one game, it would save data, it would write it to the second ROM, you'd open up the second ROM, and it would load that to the chips, you'd play that one. That was on the table, but I think that defeats the purpose of working within the constraints of the NES. So we kind of, it's still, nothing's impossible at this point, but I think we're going to just, cram what we can in, and that's the game. Actually make a 1987 NES experience.
That's fairly awesome. The route you go with that.
Yeah.
Now, I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
You have a Kickstarter going.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, what if people donate? What do they get, or at what price ranges?
Well, we had the running joke. We had the running joke that for a copy of the game, we wanted it to be 1987 prices for an NES game. So, ironically, it really doesn't cost that much less to make an NES game than it did back then. That's unfortunate. The chips are a little less expensive, but to make the manuals, to get the cardboard for the boxing, the plastic, it's honestly a lot of money to make each cartridge. But we worked it out, and for $50, someone can get the actual game. So that's that. You can get a digital version of the game. What that's going to comprise of, we'll give the ROM to those people of the game, and probably the digital copy of the PC version of the game. I don't know if they'll be able to interface the way that we're doing it, but they'll have both games. You can get a digital copy of the documentary as well. And then what we have is we have packages for physical deliverables for the physical game, the physical copy of the DVD of the documentary or Blu-ray of the documentary, the soundtrack, the physical soundtrack, which will come on CD, and then we have the cool stuff. That's the stuff that it's Kickstarter. Yeah, you get the digital copy, you get the physical copy. I want to support this project because I want to see the movie or I want to play the game. All right, but then we have the weird stuff. We've got a custom NES, which by custom NES guy, who is actually going to take some of our concept art and put it on an NES system, completely clean it out. It's going to be a custom themed NES for Mystic Searchers. So that'll be like super exclusive. I guarantee only a handful of those will get made. We have already had an order for one, so that's pretty cool. We also have the vintage package, which is the game in the movie, just like you'd see, whatever, but also the movie on VHS with some VHS bonus material and the soundtrack on cassette with some extra songs. So that'll be that's just kind of fun and whatever. We also, for $250, a lot of people are doing this package, and it's basically someone who wants to develop a game. And they want basically to get started right now and have all the things in front of them that they're going to need to make a simple NES game. That's all the tutorials, but also a blank test cartridge, the hardware and software they need to, or at least links to the software if I can't give it to them directly, to flash it from their computer to the cartridge, the chip. The tools that we end up using to do design levels and things like that. If they want to use those, if they want to make a different kind of game, they're kind of on their own, but they can use ours. They'll be available to them. So that's like a whole production pack. Here, make a game. So that's one of the cooler rewards, I think.
And how much longer is your Kickstarter for?
We're only halfway through, and we are almost at our goal. We have 16 more days to reach $36,000, and we are at almost $31,000. So this thing is going to hit probably by the weekend, and we are going to dance and celebrate and go take a boat out in the water and be crazy for a couple hours, and then come back and keep right at it. Because honestly, the more that we raise for the project, the cooler project we can make, and that's really what's important. I mean, none of us. This is not our day job for anybody who's on the team. Everybody who's on the team, this is not their primary source of income. All of the money that we raise for this project, for all the creatives, for everybody, goes into the project. So if we raise more money, we get to go to more locations for the documentary and talk to more people. Or we get to explore some different options with the modern game and hire more 3D animators to make more assets in the modern game world. Or, things like that. So, yeah, we're hoping to hit it this weekend, and we're just going to keep rolling with it.
Now, if you did go where you had voice interacted into your game, do you have any voice actors or actresses in mind of using?
Well, we've got one, and he's got experience. Excuse me. Sorry, everybody. I'm eating. We've got a big meeting right after this, so I got to wolf down my food right now. I apologize. Of course, I'm eating carrots and celery, which is the loudest thing I could be eating on the mic right now. We have one. His name is Dylan Jones. There's probably many more that we'd consider, but him because he's a great friend of the project. I've worked with him on other projects. He has been involved in doing some voice acting before, and just general voiceover work for films and for studio stuff. I've worked with him a lot. As far as known talent for voice recording, yeah, it's a possibility. I don't know. How Zelda do we want to be? Maybe we don't have any voice acting. I don't know.
I know that you're in a hurry, so in about 5 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and end this show so you could get ready.
I appreciate it, but I definitely am enjoying talking to you guys. I don't want you to think I'm bailing out on you. Just I'll get yelled at by the rest of my crew.
I understand. Are there any people on your crew or any supporters, anybody who's helped you out that you want to give a shout out to? Just kind of mention.
Absolutely. And he just announced it the other day on his Twitter, so I feel like we can now talk about it. But one of the executive producers on the project is Adam Goldberg, who was the creator and is the writer for the Goldbergs on ABC. He also wrote a bunch of episodes for Community. He wrote the first draft of Fanboys. He wrote a draft of How to Train Your Dragon. So he's kind of like embedded in, TV and Hollywood and stuff like that. And he's been a friend for a while and has been super supportive of my projects. And this one, he said, is one of the ones he's most excited about. So that's really cool. And one of my friends, Jason Berlin, also, he's an editor out in Hollywood, and he currently is editing the Dating Naked show, or Naked Dating, whatever that show is. So that's an interesting choice for him to back the project. But it's really good to have him on board. And I mean, there's some great people who are involved in. My dog hears somebody. I don't know if you hear her, but she's barking her head off. You guys still with me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Is there anybody else that you'd like to give a shout out to?
Man, I'd like to give a shout out to everybody. Maybe I should just open the backer report and run down the names. Yeah, hold on one second. There is a couple more people. Give me 2 seconds. I'm going to call out our other executive producer, who's Charles Whitson. And Charles is a guy who he's just a supporter. He's not a film guy. He's not a game guy. He just loves the idea of this project and sort of seeing it, come to reality. And he's jumped on as executive producer too. And that's a big financial investment in something like this. And so we really appreciate the folks who are, doing that kind of thing.
If you don't have anybody else, I have a few pages that shared the show, and I'd like to give them a shout out, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
One of them is I fucking love video games. Author of The Thing, Case D Mods, and I always pronounce his name wrong, but it's Meistergan. It's Misterkaden. Lady Clan for Life, Elite Skilled Gamers, The Mockingbird. Did I say that one right, Devon?
Yes, you did.
Did I say his page right?
Yes, you did.
Okay. My protege, Intergalactic Geek Alliance, the Geek Club, the Batman Cave by Intergalactic Geek Alliance, Avengers by Intergalactic Geek Alliance. Sorry, some of them are tongue tying for me. The Nerd Goddess, a new page called Community Loves Geeks. And there's one more. 360 Xbox Bars, BAWS Players, PLAYAAS. I want to thank all of them for sharing the show. And I would love to thank you for coming on. And do you want to tell everybody how they can find you, your page, Twitter?
Yeah, absolutely. It is so easy to find us because we have redirected all of our resources to our Kickstarter right now. So if you go to www.thenew8bitheroes.com, that'll get you to us. Also, your friend the Google. If you Google the New 8-Bit Heroes, you'll find it. Facebook, same thing. It's Facebook/the New 8-Bit Heroes, and on Twitter, it's just at New 8-Bit Heroes. No the for Twitter because it was too long. So New 8-Bit Heroes on Twitter, and any and all those ways are awesome ways to get a hold of us. I'd love to hear from anybody who's listening. Let me know that you were listening and checking this out, what you think of the project. If you have any further questions, definitely we love to communicate with our backers. It's one thing a lot of them have said. I've been hawking our Kickstarter for about 19 hours per day. So I'm sitting there with it open, waiting, and as soon as someone writes or pledges or comments, I'm trying to be right there because, these people are, using their hard-earned money to support this project. So I want to make sure that I'm there to thank them and to answer any questions they might have.
Did you have anything to add, hon?
Just want to just say this is an inspiring project. It's great, and I encourage everybody listening to look into that Kickstarter, and keep up with this project because it's one of those things that can be as much as we all put into it. And I just want to thank you again, Joe. That was an inspiring history of the project and everything. So.
And thank you guys so much again for having me.
Anytime. Anything you need shared, just let us know.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And everybody want to say good night?
Good night.
And this is Lady Rage signing off.